Okay, welcome to what will be a pre-recorded stream video. We're not doing this live today, but we're going to take a look at an article, if you can call that, on everyday feminism. What does multigender mean? 10 questions you may be afraid to ask, answered.
I can assure you, I'm not afraid to ask these questions. I'm more afraid to accept that people are saying this.
It's multigender theory. It's like multiverse theory, but completely crazy.
And hopefully there's no class on it.
I have not looked into that, and I'm almost afraid to. There's something I'm afraid of.
At this point, I doubt it because I didn't see any links to any studies or anything, so I'm assuming that it's okay.
Okay, let's dive right in here. There is an infinite diversity of genders in the world. Each person has a totally unique interpretation and relationship with any gender they inhabit, and there are at least as many genders as there have been humans who have lived. Now, right off the bat, the thing that I find interesting about this is everybody has a totally unique interpretation of these labels. So how do they even have any concrete meaning? What's the point of even using them? They're saying usually that, oh, well, we use these labels to define what we're feeling, but if there's no set definition, then you can't really have a label that describes what you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean these terms and these definitions are getting so loose. It's at the point where they don't have any meaning at all.
Right. I mean, at this point, you just describe yourself individually because there is no label that is really a catch-all, it seems like. I say at least because, as it turns out, people can embody more than one gender in their lifetime. We can even embody more than one gender at once. We can experience them as full and independent or as partial and mixed. I'm curious as to what this one... Oh, the at once link just goes to an Everyday Feminism article titled Valid More Than One Gender. So I'm guessing that it's... Well, that's what the link says. I'm sure it's something like you can have more than one gender and it's totally valid.
Yeah, it's only 3 months old, so people didn't realize this until now. It actually is 3 reasons it's totally valid to have more than one gender identity, and at least in this case, it's written by a different author than the one of this article.
I guess that's sort of like sourcing. Genders can overlap and negate one another. They can be positive or negative, fixed or in flux, and they can coalesce in any number of combinations.
The funny thing about this is I have occasionally joked that you can basically map gender to the set of real numbers, and it really seems like we're at the point where they can do that because you can have positive gender, you can have overlapping gender, and a gender negate another one. It can be a fixed one, or it can be in flux. It can move around, and so it's interesting to
becoming unknowingly mathematical.
Yeah, it's ironic that it's becoming that it seems to be closer to the set of real numbers because nothing about anything in this article is real.
The idea of having multiple genders is new to many and downright frightening to some, as if those are the only 2 options. It's time we advance the mainstream discussion of multi-genderism beyond just the absolute basics of, is it possible? Yes. I mean,
I can assure you there's no mainstream discussion of this.
With that in mind, here are the answers to some basic questions about what it means to be multigender. Is being multigender different from being transgender? No, it isn't. People who are multigender or polygender fall under the umbrella of trans. Now, I take huge issue with this whole umbrella of trans thing because it's not an umbrella. It's really 2 things. Transgender is short for transition, and that used to mean that you were either male to female or female to male. That's not an umbrella.
Right, you were basically in the process of, I mean, just being pedantic here, but the trans prefix just means basically going across, more or less. So it's just going from one place to another, and you can't. Well, so let's read the next part so we can get this
Okay.
commentary.
Being multigender doesn't necessarily mean that you will make any physical transition. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you disidentify with your assigned gender. Multigender people can identify with and even present as their assigned gender, but because they also identify with one or more other genders, they are still included as transgender.
So I don't understand. One, I don't understand how this can be trans. And the way that I thought of it, I said this has to fall outside of it because you just said that they don't have to disidentify with their quote assigned gender. Therefore, they would be following outside of that umbrella term, that umbrella of one, uh, going from one to another because they don't want to transition. And according to yet another internally linked article from 2015 about how you don't need to have dysphoria to be trans, it doesn't make any sense that you can say that this is a trans issue because you can be whatever you want. So there can be times when you're not.
Right. What is the purpose, though, of it's weird to me how they conflate this with being trans because one of the things was that, oh, well, it's this debilitating feeling that you're not who you're supposed to be. And that's what makes you feel like you are a transgender because you have this massive desire to be something else to the point that it makes you ill sometimes. So if you don't have that, I don't really see how you can claim that it's valid that you are trans. Because then it's
Well, I
basically
mean,
just on a whim. It's just choice.
right, and that's essentially what all of this gender identity stuff boils down to. Is it's all about what you feel at that point and whatever to whatever whim you have. It has nothing at all to do with a certain feeling, and that's why now you have people saying, "Well, you don't need dysphoria."
Why is this distinction necessary? It's necessary because it's true to life. I like the absolutes. Many people experience more than one gender, and the fact that they do deserves recognition. Why?
I find it
I appear to have lost my co-host temporarily, so we'll try to forge on until he returns. I'm sure he'll be back momentarily. We all have the right to name and define our experiences, to explore and assert our identities without intrusion or manipulation. Finding language that conveys the specifics of our identities is helpful in developing self-understanding and in communicating our realities to others. The problem with this is it goes back to the definitions and how loose they are, because they're saying, well, your gender can be experienced in any way that is personal to you, but then on the flip side here, they're saying that it's important to have this self-understanding to communicate your reality. But if you're using a label that doesn't have a set definition, your reality doesn't mean anything to anybody else. Discovering or sometimes creating the best fitting term for you is truly an act of radical self-love and one that diversifies societal perceptions of gender. Discovering or creating. So basically, you can just make up your own word to define yourself. But again, unless that word is used by more than just you, that word doesn't mean anything to anybody else except you.
right, and this is why you really can't create it because I've made this argument before, and I they would try to dismiss my argument as well. It's not creating it because somebody else uses it. So now you you can create it and either it's valid because other people are using it, which is always the argument they use. It's only real and valid because somebody else uses it, or it's real and valid because you just made it up and you therefore you discovered it and you everybody else needs to accept that.
I don't think that's how discoveries work, but I guess that's an entirely different story.
Well, it's all made up at this point, but it's confusing because they can't decide whether or not it's okay to invent things, which they are already doing, or not invent things and discover it and then claim that other people have it.
Here we go. How does multigenderism relate to the gender binary? Multigenderism is fundamentally anti-binary, whereas the gender binary is singular and exclusivist. Our dominant culture wants us to conform to a single gender, the gender assigned at birth, and no other. How multigender identities relates to gender.
Here's the problem that I have with that is that to be anti-binary would mean that it can't be included inside the binary, but the argument of whether or not that's valid aside, if somebody is multi and multi in this case just means two, then that falls well within the two. Therefore, it can't be fundamentally anti-binary because it includes the very thing it apparently is supposed to oppose.
That is true. I think, unfortunately, I feel like what they will say is that this multi-gender stuff can include any two genders or any amount of genders, and as we know, they unfortunately believe that there are infinite, so therefore I guess being multi-gender could pull from any of those infinite amount of labels.
It can, but if they were budding logicians, which they're not, they would realize that the negating something means that you cannot. In this case, it means you couldn't find any situation where just the male female binary would be included in it, but it absolutely would be included in it. And in fact, if we look at the third paragraph here, we will see this contradiction.
Actually, one more thing is that the argument that there are at least as many genders as there are people in existence, that would mean every single individual person has their own gender. So
Right, which is
everybody's part of this.
Everybody has their own thing, but guess what? We already have a term for that. It's called a personality, which these people lack.
Right. Relates to the genders of male and female, depends on the multi-gender identity in question. Some multi-gender identities relate only to the two binary genders, such as
androgyny. Therefore, contradicting what they just said.
Right, because you would be in the binary, which means male and female. Others include one binary gender, but not the other. Yet others include both male and female, along with one or more additional genders. There are also multi-gender identities that exist totally independent and outside of the gender binary. Love to see what this is. Man or woman, still non-binary. I don't know exactly what it links to. Let's see. It links to you. Yes, you can be a man or a woman and still be non-binary, and it's a Riley J. Dennis post. It's that video. I haven't talked about that yet.
Speaking of which, do you like the related articles on the right? Not just the other Riley one, but the one below that.
I saw that, a letter to young feminists who date Trump support. I'm so tempted to do that one too. Can multi-gender identities include neutral, negative, or partial genders? Yes, with the exception of genders that are appropriated from marginalized groups. See below. Multi-genders can include any type of gender imaginable. This extends to identities such as agender or neutrois, which refer to having no gender, demigender, which refers to having partial gender, and anti-gender, which is the opposites of another gender, like anti-girl, so boy, or I don't know. Okay, so right off the bat, we have a new problem here where it's like you can be any gender you want now, but with the exception of genders that are appropriated from marginalized groups. And I guess we're going to talk more about that later, but That to me makes it seem like you can't, this whole thing is entirely based off of just your imagination, because I thought that the argument here was that people are born this way, this is how they feel, this is just something that's inherently inside of them. So if that's
Their brain is designed this way.
right, if that's your reasoning, how can you tell someone that they cannot identify as that because it happens to come from some other group that you have deemed marginalized? What if that's just how they feel? Who are you to tell them that that's not who they really are? And this is why I think these narratives fall apart, because they just don't have any, there's no fundamental bases. It's like it's all just whatever you want it to be in the moment, and then that's the way the narrative goes.
It seems like there's a social pecking order here, and basically marginalized groups are always at the top. And when you have two conflicting marginalized groups, you have to go for the ones that people can actually see and are possibly real. Whether or not those are actual genders from those groups is debatable, but that seems to be the pecking order.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if they're going to give examples later, but
They don't.
oh, great. Is there a limit to the number of genders a person can have? No. Embracing multigenderism means refusing to limit the ways we can understand ourselves. And then we followed up with a contradiction. A person can have as many genders as they can conceive of, with culturally appropriative identities being the only exceptions.
And looking at the author of this will explain why she is driving so hard the concept of cultural appropriation.
I'll I'll pull up her Twitter account. I think I still have the link that you sent me. Okay. So we have it right in the bio. They like to lay it right out for us. First of all, I laughed because it's Berkeley. And then we have a queer trans Armenian. So I guess that explains it. I believe.
Oh, I forgot. They do give one example of the cultural appropriation, and you can guess which one it is.
Is it going to be India, or the thing with the Indian people?
No, it's local to North America. It's the one that everybody
Oh,
always uses.
Two Spirit or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh boy. What pronouns should I use for multigender people? The answer to this is the same as for everyone. Ask and then use whatever pronouns you're told to use, and specifically use all of them. This is always such a weird thing to me, because it never comes off as a sincere, at least in the context of these articles, it always comes off as they want to control you. They want to control how somebody else behaves. And it's like this weird power play where it's like, we don't have any power. So this is the one way that we can kind of annoy you. And I know a lot of people will use oh, well, the pronouns are really about respect, but what have you done to earn the respect of another individual to the point where you want to dictate something as foolish as a pronoun, which I think more often than not is a term that you're not even present when another person refers to you as.
Unless you're doing some kind of weird third person kind of thing. But
Yeah.
to add to that, note the big blue banner above this, and you will then understand how big they are on trying to control people.
I think I'm probably going to have to do entirely another video on that one. That's just crazy. If someone gives you more than one pronoun to use, don't just pick the one that's easier for you and ignore the rest. Use them all. And if someone asks you to use one more than the others, do that too. This gets weirdly specific, because how would you even know how to use this one more often than the other, or how many times counts as too much.
This seems like an inordinate amount of effort put in to refer to people by things that would, at this point, it would just be easier just to call them by their name.
Right, which I think is really the best way in most of these situations. You kind of can't go wrong. A note on gender-neutral pronouns. I have noticed a certain trend in group settings that I feel is detrimental to non-binary and multigender people. It happens when openly cis folks introduce themselves with binary pronouns and with they, them pronouns as well.
So I have a problem here in that how is one exactly openly cis, and how, and does that then mean somebody can be closeted
Right,
cis, which means they're
because
pretending to be,
how can you,
well, of course they're pretending to be.
here's the interesting thing. They always say, oh, well, you can't just determine somebody's pronouns by looking at them. So how can you tell if somebody is cis simply by looking at them?
Right. They have to come out as cis?
And it's especially if the argument is that cis should not be the so-called default, even though it's what fits more often than not when it comes to human beings in general. The whole thing with introducing yourself with pronouns is so weird. I've never introduced myself with pronouns. You introduce yourself by name, not by pronoun.
And I still can't get with the whole Twitter bios that have pronouns in them.
Yeah, it seems like something that leaked through Tumblr to other social media websites, because that's where I remember seeing that starting to pop up, and now it's everywhere. You got people wearing those stupid stickers that have pronouns on it. Instead of hello my name is, it's hello my pronouns are.
More work than it's worth.
Some of these people undoubtedly feel a connection to they them pronouns, and there's nothing about being cis that precludes their use, but for others it seems to be a way of showing support for non-binary genders, or of communicating to the group that they would not be offended if someone referred to them gender neutrally. Well, I can't imagine why anybody would take the time to be offended by that. It's just a word. It doesn't really have a positive or negative effect on you.
Well, if you're like 6 or 7, then yes, you would be offended by that. And if you have the thought process of a 6 or 7 year old, then yeah, you would be offended by pronoun issues.
First, this doesn't really need to happen. We should all be okay. We should all be okay, remember that, with gender neutral pronouns anyway. And this symbolic act is not a substitute for having that conversation. I kind of take issue with the whole we should all be okay with gender neutral pronouns thing, just because it seems like they're just trying to tear down the very fabric of society just for the off chance that somebody may identify outside of male or female. It's like, why does the, and I'm not necessarily saying that we should do things based on numbers or popularity, but why should the smallest part of humanity dictate the way the rest behaves?
Well, the only time I can see that happening, which is not to say that I'm agreeing with their point, but the main time I can see where the actions or decisions of the few affect the many would be basically elitists, those that have either the money or the political power to do
Right.
whatever it
And
is that they
then, to
want.
be fair, you do see that happen.
And then when they go too far, they tend to get overthrown, so they don't have full power.
Right. There's consequences for what you decide to enforce on other people, basically. Second, in most cases, this seems to diminish overall accountability. Cis people who claim they them pronouns are often not very diligent about using them with themselves or with others, and as a result, the group becomes more willing to assume that forgetting a person's additional pronouns is permissible. So
Why
this
would I ever refer to myself in
has, yeah,
third person?
that I can't imagine. And it's also interesting here that this paragraph sort of alludes to the fact that some people may just kind of be jumping on the pronoun bandwagon and not necessarily being invested in it, which I find
Somehow
interesting.
I imagine that number is a lot higher than what this person is making it seem.
Yeah, because and it's interesting to me because you can't usually get away with making an accusation like that people are hopping on a trend. That's usually seen as very offensive. Similarly, I sometimes hear cis people respond to the. I've just got to point out that I feel disgusted every time I have to say the word cis. Respond to the question of pronouns using phrases such as whatever works, I don't care, and they're all good. Maybe it's all the same to you, but it isn't to me, nor to many others. Consider the privilege that goes into being Blaze on this topic.
I believe that is a link to the same article from above.
It's why
Um,
pronouns matter. This is why
yeah.
pronouns matter for trans people.
Oh, it was written the same time, but it's not
By
the
BuzzFeed.
same. Yeah.
There are people who are too afraid to ever come out as who they are, let alone to assert their multiple identities. Hearing
Well,
dismissive
people apparently, since they have to come out as cis, they apparently, if they're faking it, they're afraid to come out as being cis and being the default.
hearing dismissive language just makes it that much harder. Cis people, be specific when relaying your pronouns and don't intrude on identities that don't really resonate with you. So this is kind of like a no true trans or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
pretty much that.
it's funny though, because now it's kind of making the accusation that, oh, if pronouns aren't really a big deal to you, you must just be cis. As if though, like, if that's as though that's even a negative thing. I mean, you're kind of making people feel like they need to be more lax towards this whole pronoun debacle. So for them saying, "Oh yeah, whatever, I don't care what you refer to me as," blah blah blah, it probably just seems like a way to kind of avoid making a big deal out of it for them.
Right, and this makes them the arbiter of somebody else's feelings.
Which is once again hypocritical because you're supposedly not allowed to determine anything about their gender identity. Are multigender identities static or fluid? Here's a great answer. They can be both. Some multigenders involve multiple gender identities that each do not change. Other multigenders involve moving through single genders one at a time. Gender fluid is sometimes used this way, though it can also mean moving through different multigenders. A person can go from having multiple genders to a single gender and back again. It's whatever you feel at the time. Genders can also be in flux. This is when a person only experiences gender identities very briefly before they change. This is often referred to as gender flux and is marked by intense variability.
So it sounds like it's the Final Fantasy IX trans mode.
But if there's no they're also saying the whole, oh, you don't need any kind of dysphoria thing. Well, if that's true, then how in the world does this even work in the brain? What is
Well,
causing this change of gender?
well, not only that, but they also said, hey, they also just said that it doesn't, it's not acceptable to, or because it can be, you can go from being whatever you want. What if one time you earlier they said you can be the gender you were assigned, And so, what if you only feel that way at that time and you don't care at that time, but then you do? So now you're telling other people in your community how to behave.
This is true. Here we go. Is having multiple genders appropriative? That depends on the specific multigender identity in question. Many genders are culturally specific, including some multigenders. This is where it kind of falls apart for me because, I mean, just in another way, I guess I should say, because now it's saying that genders are some genders are specific to culture, but you are not born knowing your culture. Your culture is learned. A prominent example of a culturally specific multigender is the two-spirit genders of some North American indigenous groups. Because it's impossible to access these genders without being part of a specific cultural context, it's inappropriate for outsiders to claim any two-spirit gender. Multigender identities can encompass many gender identities at once. If any of the if any one of the genders included is culturally appropriated, then the overarching identity also becomes problematic. How in the world can you claim that someone's very identity is problematic if you're saying that their identity is whatever they feel they are?
Well, of course, that only applies depending on who you are. But I like that they were too lazy to. And notice I've used every pronoun available for them. Yeah, I'm mixing it up. I don't want to be unfair here, but they they were too lazy to specify which indigenous groups have the concept of two spirit.
I did notice that. I'm sure that she knows what she's talking about. Oh, did I say she? I don't even know what this person identifies as.
They didn't provide their pronouns. And the other thing about that is the link on Two Spirit isn't even to like a Wikipedia entry. It's to just another everyday feminism article.
Of course it is. So pangender people, in a literal sense, identify as all genders. So there's infinite genders, or at least 7 billion of them, or however many people are alive on the planet now. And you can identify as all of them at once, yet I'm not even sure that, I mean, if you took the time to explore 7 billion genders mentally, just in your mind, daydreaming about, how long would that actually take?
Your entire lifetime. That's why these people are still stuck in childhood. But the other problem with that is that if they're so-called infinite, if it's an infinite experience and countably so, then when somebody creates a new one and you don't know that person, how can you then be pangender because you can't identify as that manufactured gender?
Right, because you wouldn't be all of the available genders because you simply aren't aware of its existence.
Right. And all of that aside, of course you can't be an infinite amount of genders, and there can't be an infinite amount, which therefore means you can't be pangender unless you really try to do this whole countably infinite nonsense, but that won't work at all. So the whole narrative falls apart very quickly. But as you know, and I know, it doesn't matter how you phrase it, how you word it, and how much you set up all the contradictions. Somehow, it just doesn't apply to them.
Many pangender folks are sensitive to this. I'd argue it's more than just them.
I imagine.
However, and identify only as all available genders. Some have even moved away from the term toward the word maxi gender. I guess that's when you identify as a maxi pad, as in maximum. Oh, my mistake.
Yeah, no. Remember to make sure that all men pay for or tampons, or should they be free? I can't remember.
I'm exempt. I identify as maxi gender. Outside the realm of culture and ethnicity, some gender identities are exclusive to intersex people, such as intergender. I really don't like this intersex argument where they're trying to say like, oh yeah, it's an entirely different sex, or check out this article, it says intersex is an argument for 5 different sexes, because it's not like you take outliers and then make a rule based on those outliers. There are some babies born without all their body parts. I mean, is that a different kind of human being?
I guess to them it is a new breed altogether. But then you even see that they don't even have a link or anything to support the concept that intergender even exists. They have one for intersex,
Right.
and of course it is and another everyday feminism article, but they don't have anything for intergender. So where's our reference point for any of that?
Other identities are only available to neuroatypical people, such as gender vague. This term that describes
What what does autism have to do with gender identity?
when spectrums collide. Gender vague. This
I
term
mean,
that
neurotypical used to mean, or it used to be something of a slang term to describe people who weren't on the spectrum.
right. I'm not
So
sure.
I don't understand. I mean, the link, if you click gender vague, just links to some task force blog, and it says gender vague at the intersection of autistic and trans experiences. So I'm not going to read that.
This term that describes being unable to discern their gender due to neurodivergence. 2 other examples are Autigender and Fascigender, which are exclusive to people with autism, which I
Well,
find.
I do agree that all these gender people are fascists. So at least I can acknowledge that fascist gender is a real thing.
This is actually to the point of hilarity now, because earlier it said that the exception was you could identify as any gender as long as it's not culturally appropriative. But now, I mean, unless we're going to argue that autism is a culture, you're saying that these 2 genders are exclusive to people with autism.
Well, I guess there must be a culture to it. Now, by the way, both of those links, Octogender and Fascigender, link to
Oh,
Tumblr pages.
wow, that's amazing. Always look into an identity before claiming it as your own, which, okay, this is like massively
You
disappointing that so many people believe that stuff like this is real, because oh yeah,
if you have to look into one to claim it as your own, then you can't create one.
not only that, but if you're looking into an identity to claim as your own, how the hell are you being yourself? I mean,
What?
you're basically just pretending that human beings are this blank slate, and you go out into the world and I feel like this fits me, so I'm gonna put on this identity like a dress, and then whenever I want I can take it off and say I'm something else. I mean, yes, people change and their ideas and minds develop, but and their opinions change and things like that, but
Or
to
they
say
used
that
to.
your identity is just like, it's just this term and that you can take on and off whenever you want, and it's somehow connected to your mindset or your brain, like how you're born. That's crazy to me, because how can you argue that you're born a certain way and then you just take your so-called identity from some random Tumblr blog?
I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense. But there is at least one thing that I can say. I feel like there was already a video game about this whole identity crisis, and so I think that's I think that game did a better job of handling the whole identity problems than whatever this is.
Final Fantasy VII.
Oh no, a game called Flashback because the subtitle is the quest for identity.
Ah, that makes sense. Are multigender people oppressed? Here we go. Yes, being multigender is fundamentally contrary to our society's hierarchical and exclusivist gender binary. This means that
It was a waste. It was a waste of time to even answer in the affirmative.
it really was.
That shouldn't have even been a question.
This means that at the very least, multigender people are oppressed socially and psychologically. Our identities are made invisible. They are trivialized, othered, and dismissed. So once again, here we go with the going back to psychology and, you know, oh, being part of your brain and stuff, but yet you can change your gender or you can change your identity on a whim. So, I mean, to me,
And
that says that it's not.
right, and if the claim is that your brain is actually developing differently, then what kind of studies are have been done on people with these shifting identities? I imagine it won't be something that they want to hear, but that contradicts what research that they like, the very little research they provide. It contradicts everything that they provide there, because you can't be you can't claim that it's a neurological development and then you have situations like this where it clearly couldn't be, and or you're opening up the possibility that if well, these multi-gender people, their brains don't have the same problem that absolutely transgender people have, and therefore it's not real, then it opens the door, and for them it opens the door for a lot of problems, because what are they going to do? Discredit the reality, discredit the transgender people, the traditional view of male to female or female to male transgender,
It
or
does.
are they?
I was going to say that it seems like it's getting to the point where first they started out where it's like, oh, you could be anything you want, but then they realized, well, oh crap, that doesn't work, because now certain people that aren't supposed to take these identities from this culture or that culture are starting to identify this way, and we have to kind of pull it in. So then they start to eat each other, and then it becomes
Yep,
another battle of who's on the lowest end of the oppression scale.
right. Who's lowest on the pecking order there, or highest in this case?
The other thing, the part that bothers me about when it says oppressed socially, is that they have loosened the meaning of gender to basically be something that is so personal that it's entirely up to the subjective reality of the individual. So there's no way that society would ever be able to recognize them for something that is so personal to you, because you don't share that part of yourself with society. Basically, you share those kind of things with your close friends, your family, your significant other. Society as a whole, though, they just see appearance, really. I mean, most people don't know you or have such shallow interaction with you that it really never even comes to light who you truly are on the inside. And that goes for everybody. That's not just people that claim random genders. That's not being oppressed. We suffer stigmatization, microaggressions, and various forms of body terrorism. The legitimacy of our self-understanding is called into question every day. The extent to which multigender people are oppressed is highly variable. It is influenced by the matrix of each person's intersecting identities.
I feel like these people are definitely in some kind of matrix.
It's a spectrum. If a multigender person is of color, an immigrant, wow, working class, queer, and or disabled, they will experience a greater degree of gender-based and binarist oppression than a person with relative privilege. So how exactly How exactly does that play into their, how does being a person of color or being an immigrant or being working class play into your gender?
It doesn't, but we need to get all those points, and so let's not forget that we need to always refer to these people every time we're talking about oppression.
Additionally, a multigender person's experience of oppression is affected by factors specific to their gender. Femgender people, for instance, have an accentuated experience of femmephobia because they identify with multiple femgenders.
Okay, one, how are there multiple fem genders?
Right. Why is
Is
that
only one.
necessary? Like, why can't female?
Two, two, fem gender has no link to it, but femphobia does. And three, the word would be gynophobia if we're going to use Greek terms here. I thought these people were big on being woke and learned and understanding everything that they got in liberal arts school, and now all of a sudden they are making things up and they don't understand that the Greek language already had a word that referred to women, or
I'm
they're
sure.
just adding phobia to everything to feel like, oh, this is a problem. But
Yeah, I mean,
I,
I'm sure
I,
there's some stupid justification that femme does not mean woman or something like that. Multigender people who are not able to pass for a binary gender commonly experience harassment, as do multigender people who transition physically using hormones and surgeries. Gender fluid and gender flux people whose presentation may change from day to day are often subject to intense social marginalization. You know who else was harassed for the way they dress and things like that? We had nerds, we had emo kids. It's
goths.
yeah, fashion. People are always judged on their fashion.
And in this case, their lack of, because that, I mean, that's what all of these gender identities feel like. The only difference is that at least once upon a time, having a fashion sense was just a fashion sense. It was superficial, and it didn't. At some point, you were old enough to realize it doesn't really make up who you are at all. And now it seems like intrinsically intertwined with our psyche, and we are at a point where we have nothing else better to do with our time, that we are demanding acceptance of somebody's fashion sense in as much as calling it an identity.
Right. I mean, it's just a personal choice. You wear what you want to wear. You style your hair the way you want to style your hair. If it looks weird based on whatever culture or society you live within, that's still your choice, and you kind of just have to roll with whatever judgment that warrants from other people. And maybe it's not right for people to do that, but I mean, that's just kind of the way it goes. If you make yourself an outcast or an outsider, sometimes that you're going to be, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. And if you want to do that, you want to express yourself the way you want to, you kind of have to accept whatever consequences come with that. Now, I'm not saying it's fair to be harassed based on stupid things like that. I mean, I'm sure nobody believes it, and it's completely invalid because I'm a male. But I've been harassed for stupid things like that when I was younger, and just didn't care.
I know I have, but of course I get some of the oppression points. So of course it's different, a little bit different for me. But to me, I feel like if you wear red flannel, skinny jeans, an oversized belt, and Chuck Taylors, and the sides of your head is shaved, then you're agender.
And you're going to be all right.
That but I don't understand how that's an expression
Yeah,
as
I mean, I don't know
no
how that's a gender. And I know people are going to be
right.
like, oh, well, you're conflating gender expression with gender identity. But if those two things are completely independent of one another, then how do they come together to describe somebody's gender expression in the first place?
Right. And how why is there an expression of nothing?
I mean, because to me, if you're basing that on fashion, nothing would just be, I don't know, either you're invisible or you're naked, one of the two. And please don't
Or you
do the
just wear
latter.
clothes. That to me would be indicative of not having a gender, but there seems to pretty much be a uniform for age, because I think, what was it? It was National Geographic or something that had that picture of basically all the, or
Yeah, the
just
cover.
a handful of genders, and like the agender one was basically just some pale lanky guy with shaved
Yeah,
head. And
just let it sink in that handful of genders actually describes something.
yeah, well, I mean, it describes the downfall of a once respected publication.
Well, now I sense some dislikes coming in on that one. All right, so what are some other multigender identities, you ask? Well, I didn't, but we got the answer. I have been unable to find a comprehensive list of every multigender, although there are some lengthy
Imagine that.
there. And guess what? Genderfluidsupport.tumblr.com. But here are just a few more examples of the multigender identities that have been described in our culture. Amor gender. Gender that changes in response to a romantic partner's. Oh my. So this describes what I would describe as a person that is very insecure and emulates what they see their loved one do.
Right. So they're basically the average human being.
Yeah, that probably works. Mirror gender. Gender that changes to reflect those around you. So this is like the Munchausen's of gender.
Pretty much. Man, I'd hate to see how they respond to peer pressure.
Oh, ambigender. Two genders experienced simultaneously as equal and unchanging. What's the metric for that? How do you determine that they're equal?
I don't think that you will find an answer.
I think the answer
There's
is
no
when
research.
both halves of you get equal pay.
That's called yeah, that the two-face principle. Basically, that's how you can tell they're equal and unchanging. But yeah, that's that's probably as far as it'll go.
They're appropriating Square Enix culture here. Chaos gender. Gender that is highly unpredictable.
Well, I guess that explains Vincent Valentine.
I can't believe that the one that I'm about to read next. Gender fuck. A subversive gender that can be singular or multi. Pretty sure I went this whole video without swearing until then.
And you said nothing.
This is a very well-respected gender label, I'm sure. Imagine just like filling that out on an application or at the DMV or or at the doctor.
Well, you know, I have a finger that would reciprocate that gender.
That works. Demi-fluid. Having multiple genders where some are fluid while others are static. I mean, I don't understand.
If you mix electricity and fluid together, you're not going to have a good time. Just saying.
I don't know why that would fall outside of the whole gender fluid terminology. Coal gender, not pangender, but having too many genders to describe. So this doesn't even make sense, because if you have too many to describe, then you don't even know what they are and what you're feeling. Endogender.
Yes, and you probably need some psychological assistance.
Having multiple genders that all relate to a specific gender construct, e.g. mask fluid. That's a very oppressive gender because I think it suffers from massive amounts of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Cyclogender, gender that changes with hormonal cycles.
I was hoping somebody a gender that is a bicycle, but
or a tornado. That would have been interesting. Cisgender, having highly disparate genders, as in fissured.
Okay.
This is great. Dom gender. Get your kink websites out. Having multiple genders where one is dominant over the rest. So you got the alpha gender, you know? He's the top dog, telling all those other genders what to do.
Yeah, well, when it comes to gender, most of these people are betas anyway.
Gender vex. Having multiple genders, each of which is unidentifiable.
Yep.
Which I feel like just destroys the whole entire post. I mean, if you completely ignore all the other times that it contradicted itself.
An everyday feminism staple.
If it's unidentifiable and you can't describe it, how do you even know it exists? If you yourself cannot say what it is you're feeling, doesn't that just make you confused?
You know, I hear hitting somebody changes that confusion aspect. Uh, well, depending on the game in question.
RPGs taught me anything.
I mean, yeah, we can talk all about that, and they'll still say they're not confused, and somehow they'll find some sort of it'll never be a good answer, but they'll always have some sort of answer or defense for how they can have multiple genders and all of them are unidentifiable.
And I guess we'll go into final thoughts mode, a la Jerry Springer. Basically, that's really what it comes down to, is that they always have that excuse because the things that they're describing are just personal preferences and personality quirks that are indicative of the individual and not an entirely new gender, especially when you're arguing for the existence of enough genders for every person on the planet, because then it just comes down to everybody experiences their gender in their own way, meaning that genders are not groups. It's just a way to
And
yourself.
and the other thing is that I don't know if they can really decide how many there are, because this would suggest there are more than 7 billion genders, and therefore it is possible to be infinite, because you can create them, but it really all, and it can change, and it can change as you progress with time. But I mean, it's clearly the issue here is that we say for all of these things, it's another attempt to garner attention and have people pay attention to somebody and have them perceived as different for whatever reason, because they don't have enough capital and personality to seem interesting. So they have to come up with some kind of term that make them feel different and make them feel like they're oppressed, and then find a group that can accept them. And when you criticize that, you are basically criticizing the people that help them feel not different. But guess what? Doesn't matter. You're going to feel different no matter what happens.
And then it's the easy way out is just to place the blame on society itself, rather than having to do any self-reflection to find out if maybe your problems are internal, rather than being the entirety of the world out to get you. And in most cases,
Right.
I would argue it's not. I mean, society has become pretty darn tolerant, and now it's getting to the point of they just don't know how to say no to ridiculous things because they set themselves up for this.
Right. And so they're running the risk of they just can't do anything without worrying that somebody's going to be offended. And so now everybody's being over accepting to the point where now it's to be super tolerant, and here it's just becoming intolerant.
And I still find it interesting that the so-called binary rules don't apply to them, but yet they can say in the same breath, well, it's infinite, your identity is whatever you feel it is, but then say, oh, well, here's these arbitrary rules where you can't claim this identity if you are born as this. But I mean, this all really came down to the whole trans thing. I mean, they really went off of, okay, the person is born this way. They feel like they are born in the wrong body. So you're kind of losing steam when you make it sound like you can change all of that on a whim. It kind of degrades that, and I'm surprised that more of these trans people that have done male to female or female to male aren't upset about this, because it kind of degrades the reasoning, or invalidates the reasoning for their existence by lumping all of this stuff together.
It's definitely a house of cards, and I guess my concern is that I don't think they'll ever just let it fall, because they are becoming increasingly desperate to just add on top of it and find some sort of way to make it so that it's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my my last point is just that rather than getting these people the proper help, it's just taking everything they say at face value and blindly accepting it without question, because somehow they have tricked people into believing that that's the one true path to their personal happiness. The expense of everybody else, just to make them happy. And that's like the ultimate hedonistic identity. I guess
Hey,
we can add
it's not
hedogender to the list.
it's not hurting anybody, right?
Nope, just the very fabric of society. And on that note, we will call it a day. Dislike and leave your hate mail below in the comments, as always, and we shall see you next time.